Design Tangents is presented by Genesis, which offers the pinnacle of quality and luxurious comfort.
Genesis cars embody both elegance and power with audacious design and groundbreaking technology. From first glance through ownership, your experience will be nothing less than exceptional.
Learn more at genesis.com.
My goal really is always to show people something they haven't seen before or help them imagine something they haven't imagined before. And as a standalone venture, that's fine and that can work, but usually it involves a performer or a performance of some kind, and then it becomes something else because you've immediately got a relationship at the heart of the project. And that is the most important thing for me, is the relationship between me and the performer. It's the two halves of of creating the whole.
Welcome to Design Tangents, a podcast from Cool Hunting exploring the creative processes and inspirations that drive changemakers. I'm Josh Rubin.
And I'm Evan Ornston. Josh, much like Cool Hunting, Willie Williams is not a household name. But for those who know of it, they really know who he is and what he does. Willie and his team at Treatment Studio in London are known for their work creative directing and designing all kinds of live events. And Willie has been creating U2's live experiences for the last 40 years.
And it's not just U2. He has worked with so many other incredible artists to create visual and experiential narratives. Bowie, George Michael, Gaga, Sigur Rós, Laurie Anderson, and so many more.
In this episode of Design Tangents, Willie shares his passion for reading, for integrating new technology into live experiences, and for translating his clients' desires. Remember, Josh, some of his clients are the most famous and successful musicians of all time, and he translates those into indelible, inspirational memories for their fans.
We caught up with Willie in Las Vegas after seeing U2's show at the Sphere, and we also saw Weekends with Adele, which Treatment Studio creative directed at Caesar's Palace.
If you're new to Cool Hunting, we've been reporting on creativity and innovation since 2003. Visit coolhunting.com or Cool Hunting on any social media channel to see what we think is worth sharing. Also, consider sending it to your friends in your text, Slack, or social groups. And now, here's Willie.
Willie, you're clearly known for your work creative directing and designing U2's live experiences, and you've worked with so many other artists as well to, kind of create. It's not just their visual. It's experiential. It's design. It's so many modalities of narrative, if you will. From Bowie, George Michael, U2, of course, Gaga, Sigur Rós, and many others. But we are really here to talk about a little bit of background, a little more present, and getting into some of the stuff with the Sphere and U2, and a lot more kind of future and the future of entertainment and narrative and storytelling.
So your company is called Treatment Studio. It is not a household name. It's something that people within the industry probably know really well. But can you describe to our listeners what Treatment Studio is?
It exists to facilitate the work that Sam Pattinson and I do. The backbone of the studio really is making video content, video material, but it also extends into full production design. But it really is a case-by-case basis, and the core of it is making visual identity for, be it a show or for a product or a situation. And it's really evolved at its own pace over the years. Sam had to talk me into it. Sam was a video producer when I met him, and he was producing video material I was making for a Rolling Stones tour in 2002. And we got on like a house on fire, and so I wanted to work with him on everything I did after that involved video. And sometime later, he suggested that we formalize this relationship and start a company, and I could not have been less interested, because I've always been a bit of a lone, I've always been a bit of a sort of a solo player, and I'm very good at fitting into the environments that I work in. Each project is a group of people coming together, and generally it's quite a bespoke situation, and then it breaks up afterwards. It vaporizes after the project. And I like that. I never had an office. I just have a laptop and a chair, or whatever it takes. So that always really suited me. So the notion of having to deal with a company and everything wasn't particularly attractive. Anyway, Sam promised he would do everything. And his point, which was very good, was because most people we work with are freelance, if you don't keep freelancers busy, they disappear. And he said, what if we made a place that they like to hang out? And so we know where they are, basically. So he promised he'd do everything. I absolutely held him to that, probably to a greater degree than he imagined. And it has been great. And looking back now, it's remarkable. There are even some of the freelancers we've worked with for 15 years. And so I feel on some level we have created this place that people really like to be. The culture there is, we really like to give people freedom to kind of fulfill a brief in a way that works for them and to learn from them. I mean, the fantastic things. And it's thrilling to meet the younger people who just have these other sensibilities. So it's been really, really creatively interesting for all of us to do that. And as you say, it's not a household name because we are not the main attraction here. It's what we do for either these performers or these projects that we work on. And it's not really about us.
And you don't have big egos, because we were thinking about what's an analogy to this, and well, an architectural firm, for example, where you and Sam on occasion collaborate, but you're typically working and leading your own projects, right? So similar to the structure of an architecture firm, where each architect is leading their projects, but of course there's collaboration within the group. Or Pentagram Studio, a really famous creative studio, which similarly has different designers who lead their own kind of mini businesses within the context of that larger group.
Yeah, and although, even though that sounded a little humble, we're quite bolshy, actually, and quite picky about the projects that we take on, because we only want to work with people that we like and take on work that's interesting or stimulating for us. So we're quite choosy, and staying small really facilitates that because we don't have a huge machine to feed. So again, we're humble, but with a little bit of an attitude, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really important because not all your work, but a good part of it, if you're dealing with an artist on tour, for example, you are often there for the duration of that.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a big commitment. It's not just like working on a project, delivering it and saying, thank you, see you later.
Yeah, not still. But I do think also it really becomes part of the work. And if we create an environment that the creatives love to be in, and even for ourselves to spend time away from home and so much energy. I mean, with the bigger projects, so much of me goes into those, and I just don't want to do it for people that I don't respect or don't like being with. And that's, even though that's it's a very personal thing, I think for the culture of a studio, it's really paying dividends because people just want to be there.
I imagine that anyone who's been working with you for so many years has, there's a shorthand. Yes. There's every time you do another project, it potentially gets a little bit smoother or easier, or there's more history to leverage, which then makes it desirable to keep working with the same freelancers. How do you nurture new people coming into the team, right? Because there is, I imagine, some value to finding that new creative energy, someone who has a crazy sense of color or some other, something that they're bringing to the bigger picture of learning and inspiration, and also needs to be able to move quickly and collaborate well.
It's very much personality based, and we don't try to nurture a kind of culture. It's just who we are and what we do. And we're both, pretty eccentric. And I have a way of working and a kind of a parlance and the way of describing work that either someone will tune into and get or not. And you can feel it quite quickly with new people that come in. What's really lovely, though, is as young people come in and start to learn and start to develop their skills, they develop instincts. And I can see they don't even know it, but their instincts are my instincts. You're creating a kind of team that collectively has the same instincts that I have, and I see it with people who were my kind of mentors. You just think this is the way it's done, and you don't realize that this is the way that this particular person does it. And that's really thrilling. And that also really helps as a group because we all share certain methods and certain values and just certain instincts of doing things.
Is it clear right away when you find someone new if their patterns are matching, if the frequencies that they're moving on are compatible with your frequencies?
You can certainly tell if someone is motivated in the right kind of way. And when I look back at my 18, 19-year-old self, the thing I missed, the thing I didn't realize at the time was just how driven I was. Not in any kind of career arc kind of a way, but basically because I ran away and joined the circus and I was just working with bands in pubs and clubs and everything. And just the thought, for me, if you can do this, why would you do anything else? This is the only place I wanted to be. And those kind of people you can spot. People who, just think this might be a cool thing to do for a while, or I'll do this as a summer job. We weed those out immediately. It's the people who just want to be here and will do whatever it takes to do it. And that you can spot.
Have you discovered things that you don't want to do again? Are there certain kinds of things that you were just like, nope, we're going to pass on this?
Yeah. There has to be some personal interest in it for me. Geographically, too, there are places I'm not keen on going to, simply because it takes so much time and it takes so much personal investment. So we're quite picky. My goal really is always to show people something they haven't seen before or help them imagine something they haven't imagined before. And as a standalone venture, that's fine and that can work. But usually it involves a performer or a performance of some kind, and then it becomes something else because you've immediately got a relationship at the heart of the project. And that is the most important thing for me, is the relationship between me and the performer. It's the two halves of of creating the whole. And that's crucial. And, sometimes it's quite surprising. Something that wouldn't immediately seem like it would be interesting. You meet the person and they're just great, or it sparks some resonance or something like that. So that's key to it, really, rather than what the project actually is.
We hear that you love a good prank.
Or Easter egg.
Look, it's got to be fun. We're out here. You spend time away from home, and it's such hard work, and that's not a bad thing if you love it, but it's got to be fun. I would think there really is value and cultural value to what we do, but you only have to spend 2 minutes looking at the news and realizing that this is what we do is an absolute luxury. So it has to be fun. And sometimes you need to burst the bubble a little bit if it's getting a bit too serious.
So we're here in Vegas.
We are,
because
sadly.
You've been working here for quite a while now.
Most of my adult life, it feels like.
The U2 show at the Sphere. And I imagine that you don't have a lot of time to get out and explore, but we also did hear that you recently visited the Pinball Museum, which is one of our favorite places.
Pinball Hall of Fame, I believe.
Pinball Hall of
Josh,
Fame, yes, sorry.
Yeah, that's the only thing, not to interrupt, but I did, actually during the pandemic, I did an interview. It's not really the kind of thing I would normally do. And it was 10 questions, and they were asking lots of designers, 10 questions. And there was the same questions, and one of them was, which Olympic sport do you think you'd be best at? Which, if you know me at all, is the most preposterous question imaginable, not having a single sporting gene in my entire DNA. But my answer was they'd obviously have to invent a new category, but pinball. And discovering the Pinball Hall of Fame in Las Vegas has changed the city for me completely. And now I can see it has a spiritual center. And it's a lovely place. I mean, it's just a big warehouse full of pinball machines. Nothing fancy about it at all. The drinks machine works sometimes. But it is like walking through a living archive of my misspent youth. It's really wonderful.
It's really one of our favorite places. And what a lot of people don't know is that they both find things, they restore them, they add to their collection, but many of the things are also for sale. And or if you find something, you can send it to them and they can fix it for you. Right. So if you have this, whatever, vintage pinball machine, and it's not just limited to the mechanical devices, although they have all kinds of rock'em sock'em boxing things too, and magician talking head things. But they also have a whole archive of digital games from, those arcade games from the 70s, 80s on up.
Any favorite machines of yours?
Oh, there's so many. We love the racing games. So like the driving games are really fun. And
I'm not remembering specific pinball machine names, but I love the ones where you have a moment where you don't know where the ball went. When it's like
it's called a lock. Yeah,
a lock. Okay, yeah, we love them. I love the ones with a lock. You get into a rhythm with the machine, and then all of a sudden it breaks the rhythm.
Yeah, there were 2 or 3 that were absolute favourites of mine. The Addams Family machine was amazing, and the Twilight Zone machine was great. And they have them both now. Currently, the Addams Family machine is not working, but hopefully somebody's on that. But I found the Twilight Zone machine, and the physical, like the muscle memory of playing is remarkable, because it's probably 10 years since I touched a pinball machine. And I was laughing at myself because within minutes, the sort of the leg action and all the instincts came back. And first game was a bit of a shambles, but second game, 2 replays on the second game. So still got it.
Yeah. It's nice to have an outlet when you're here. You can go and spend an hour just not to talk to anyone and play some pinball. It's really exciting.
Yeah, and so cheap. I mean, the RSI is more of an issue than it was when I was younger, but it's inexpensive entertainment in an expensive town.
We mentioned kind of along with pranks about this concept of Easter eggs, right? So a lot of us know about Easter eggs in terms of software, but there's a little bit of quirk in your work often. And if you pay attention, if you're just kind of sitting there, maybe like before the show starts, but things are starting to happen, we saw a few things pop up in the sphere during the U2 show that were like, oh, that looks like something's broken. But then you look and you're like, oh, no, that's very intentional.
Yes, it's art. Yes.
Where did that come from?
Well, it's partly a need for self-entertainment. It's partly, honestly, it's also to do with morale, because keeping the team buoyant is really, really important, because the hours that go into these projects and and everyone's away from their families, et cetera, et cetera. So part of it is morale, and also partly to give people an opportunity to play within this structure. We've built this incredible thing. I mean, the Sphere specifically, we've built this incredible thing, and just to let people kind of have a play. And I'm not quite sure where it started, but the walk-in look for the Sphere is the Pantheon made of concrete, basically. So you walk into this giant space with an oculus hole in the middle and the night sky outside. And I just thought it would be very funny if you walked in at some point and, like in the roof high up of a shopping mall, there was a helium balloon just stuck there that some kid had let go. So that's where it started. And again, my team is so great. I thought it would be nice if there was a pigeon up there, like a bird nesting, and I give that to the team, and then within 2 days, there's a pigeon that flies around and does various things. One of my favorites is there's a work light that gets stuck on, and it's up there in the Pantheon. It's a really ugly little strip light that just gets stuck on and flickers. And yeah, I've had 1 or 2, the technicians wonder if we should go and fix it and this and the other. So it's really, really fun. And then embedded in the show itself, there are some fun things. There's one frame of a cow, which is there in honor of Gavin Friday. I can't quite remember now, but that pops in at one point, and so it goes. And then the fish that comes out of the balloon, because it's always important to get a fish into a show somewhere. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about this sense of like archiving, and we understand that you are, very thorough and interested in journaling, in archiving, maybe even a little bit obsessive about this. How do those practices help you with your work or create your work?
Well, to be honest, it's like asking how does breathing help the work. It's so innate. And with the journaling is interesting. I've kept journals since I was 15 years old, and miraculously I haven't lost any of them, given I've lived all over the world and this and that. But I still have them all, and never revisit them, because obviously, as anyone who's ever kept a journal knows, it's mortifying beyond your worst nightmares. But there's something about, you can't throw them away. I couldn't possibly throw them away, even though it is 99% stuff that's just irredeemably awful. But look, if you keep a journal for long enough, it becomes a kind of therapy, and you tend to write more when things are not great than when things are going swimmingly. So I like to think I've got 40 years of complaining. But during the pandemic, when we all had more time than we knew what to do with, I thought I'd take a look. And the first task, I guess, was to just see if I could transcribe them. I'll transcribe them, I thought. And the very early ones are the sort of demented teenage diaries, so they were pretty easy to get going. But once it starts to get more intense, the books get smaller and smaller, and the handwriting gets smaller and smaller. And it's a lot to try and transcribe it. And I wasn't letting myself edit at all, because I figured, horrifying though it is, I've just got to get the raw material down there and just see what's there. Going at it fairly full time, it was taking me about a month to transcribe a full year, at which point I worked out that just to transcribe them was going to take 4 years as a full-time job. So obviously that's not going to happen. So I was a little bit more picky, and I realized there was an 8-year period between leaving high school, and meeting U2. And that period of time was spent, just, let's say, running away with punk bands in transit vans and playing every hellhole in the UK. But what's rather nice about that is somewhere in there is a portrait of punk and post-punk UK touring. Yeah. And really, really innocent things that were so ordinary at the time become the most charming. And there was a thing where, because nobody had any money and the van usually broke down, et cetera, so the social centres became the motorway service stations, like the British equivalent of 80s equivalent of a truck stop in Britain. And at 4 a.m, when 3 of you were sharing a breakfast special, you'd see this other group of colourful looking characters, and someone would come over and say, "Who are you then?" And say, "Well, we're the Snots." And they say, "Well, who are you?" Blah, blah, blah. And even though there was a rivalry and everything, it was, we were all on the same team, ultimately just trying to find a way to stay part of this culture and be part of this musical event. Because punk happening in Britain was seismic, because the country's so small. And I was 17 when punk happened, so it was just perfect. And the ethos, the message in the air was that anybody can do anything. And so we kind of did. And to see it, it is very weird to read a first-hand account in your own voice of events that you don't remember. That's quite an odd experience, but part of it is quite charming. So there's a value there. And then, in later life too, I'm still figuring out what is in there and what, if anything, they're useful for. There's absolutely no notion of publication per se, because
why not though?
Because I had to kill myself before I published them, and probably several other people too. But we'll see. We'll see what's there. I think it's really valuable raw material, and they're also kind of scrapbooks. There are artifacts, and I didn't think I had a particularly good archive because I didn't go to art school. I don't have endless, wonderful, fascinating drawings from early life, etc. But there are things I found which I was really startled to rediscover, because I'm terribly organized. I'm boringly organized, and so there was just a folder for each project or tour. And I found I have a little room at Treatment, a cupboard which is my office. And I found a set list in David Bowie's handwriting on yellow legal paper from the Sound of Vision tour. And there's his handwriting and my handwriting, because we were figuring something out. And somehow that piece of paper has managed to survive through space and time, and there it is. So those kind of things are quite shocking. And in a kind of written narrative sort of way, the journals have those surprises too. Because looking back, because it's a journal rather than a memoir, of course, at the time, you never write down the things that you never know what's going to be interesting in the future. And there's sometimes, often actually on that Bowie tour, where I think, why didn't you write more about that? Went to the Dali Museum in St. Petersburg with David. And what in-depth conversations did you have about, but you never know when it's coming. But as I say, the joy of it is the surprises, and there are some artifacts, but I think there are written ones too, which is the thing I'm most interested in, I think. So
it's really interesting you mentioned Bowie, because from what I understand, he also was quite an archivist. and
amazing.
really was very meticulous in capturing kind of his journey and experience and the props and, the written things.
One of the things I passed on to you too was because Sound of Vision, I did the 2 Tin Machine tours and the Sound of Vision tour. And Tin Machine, of course, was his grunge club band that everybody hated, was absolutely fantastic to be part of, playing these tiny places. And then Sound of Vision was the big retrospective where he played everything you could ever want. And it was the big immersive film technique by Edward Locke from La 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 Human Steps in Canada. And so I felt like in many ways I really got the great extremes of working with him. Interestingly, it's a period which has pretty much been erased from all the histories. Even the film, the Moon Age Daydream film, barely references that part of his career. But going into Sound and Vision, which obviously was retrospective, they said, come and look at the archive. And it was jaw-dropping. This is 1989, and it was jaw-dropping then, where there are catalogues telling you where to find things, and says, the original slides from the Diamond Dogs album cover shoot, that's in drawer 42, and you go and find it. And it's really, really amazing. And so I did say to the U2 guys, you might want to take note here because this stuff doesn't look after itself. And so there's definitely, I definitely understand that urge to just catalogue things. And again, like with the Bowie archive, they haven't done anything with it. It's not like it's at the Smithsonian or something, it's just there. And I feel a little bit the same way. It's a desire to kind of observe and organise rather than necessarily publish or do anything. You just want to leave the place tidy, basically. So,
Willie, you're a really avid reader.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about what you're reading, what inspires you, what do you keep going back to? How does reading play in your creative process?
One of the best things I've done in the past few years is I've joined the London Library, which is not to be confused with the British Library. The London Library is a private library in Mayfair, and you walk in and it looks like a gentleman's club. But the further and further you get into the building, you get into the back stacks and everything, and it gets more and more utilitarian. And of course, there are just there's thousands, millions of books in there. And what's lovely about that is you can go in and, if I read a review or just come across something whilst reading about an author, or if there's some reference, you can go in and find the book, take it to the rather nice, reading room and just sit and spend time reading. So I've been able to dip into a lot more things than I would have done if I'd just been ordering things online or this, that, and the other, and also sort of skim more things just to get a sense of what's going on. But I tend to run a kind of dual path, really, because I find fiction really helpful when working on a project, because it can just take me somewhere else and let me stop thinking about it. Whereas fact-based things have an appeal because you feel like you're learning something. I mean, the greatest thing I read recently was the column to Bean, The Master, which is his interpretation of Henry James. And my partner is a great reader, and thinking about that, I've barely skimmed the surface. But he recommended this, and the genius of Colin to Bean is he writes a book about the life of Henry James, pretty much in the voice of Henry James or in the style of Henry James. And I was completely captivated by it, and therefore started a Henry James Odyssey. So that's been really wonderful. And
are magazines part of the kind of canon of reference?
Not so much for me, actually. I never thought I'd be an e-reader kind of person until I got one. And there are some magazines that work digitally and some that don't. But again, because of my partner who gets World of Interiors, he's a horticulturist, so there are garden magazines, we get the New York Review of Books, we get the London Review of Books. So even though I say I'm not a magazine person, there are always magazines around. New Yorker has been the one consistent for a long time. I've never really contemplated whether the fiction I read feeds directly into the work. Because actually, on reflection, I enjoy really bleak fiction. Muriel Spark I love, and some of the Eastern European characters, Stefan Zweig, who wrote incredibly bleak short stories, and Arthur Schnitzler, and there's a whole crowd of them, many of whom were dragged off and murdered by the Nazis. But there's something about the tone of that, and I tell you actually who has really picked up on that. The theatre company Complicité which is Simon McBurney, has done stage interpretations of some Eastern European fiction which you wouldn't think was possibly stageable. They're incredibly memory Street of Crocodiles he did, which is Bruno Schultz. And so perhaps that's partly where it came from. It's a level of escapism, I think, and it sort of speaks to a time where it was so dangerous what they were doing. It was only worth doing if it was really important. And maybe there's a little bit of that I find inspiring, or maybe I'm just generally a bleak person, but how that feeds into the work, I'm not sure, but it's a part of an overall mindset, I suppose. Back in the London Library, I was looking at Robert Louis Stevenson, and there's a whole range of books of his that we don't know, and there's one called Ebb Tide, which is a kind of swashbuckling thing, which I sat in the comfy chair in the library and read in an afternoon, and it was kind of great. And it was probably a New Yorker thing, but the Killers of the Flower Moon author, whose name I won't remember, has a book called The Wager, which is, it's a similar, it's true, it's again like Killers of the Flower Moon, it's based on a true story. And it's very similar. They mentioned this Robert Louis Stevenson book, which I just happened to have read. So I brought that with me, and also the new Michael Cunningham, because The Hours is one of the greatest triumphs. It's a really, really wonderful book. So I've got that, but apparently that's pretty bleak as well. So I should probably fit right in.
Yeah.
So those are hard, but I've now found a balance. Those are hard copy, and then on the e-reader, a stash of things I can dip into if I'm traveling light. So
Fiction's important because it does take you outside of that reality, right? It puts you into a different place, just like a lot of the work that you create, right? It's lifting you out of where you are and where you've kind of entered from to being in that moment and having that experience.
Yeah, and it's limitless. I said my partner, David Khalil, who is a horticulturist and bassoonist, that old combo, is also his life is about books, really, and reads more than I can imagine it's possible for any human being to read. And so our life is completely full of books. And we moved house recently, and by far the largest, more than the furniture, the largest thing to move was books. And there are hundreds and hundreds of books. But it's kind of amazing, again, during the pandemic, to be able to just walk into effectively our own library and just pick something, Simone de Beauvoir. Now, what was she on about? And it's really been amazing, actually. So I'm so used to being surrounded by books and just the feel of them and, what they do to a space.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
It's time to discover a new approach to luxury automotive, where Korean sensibility meets audacious design, groundbreaking technology powers every ride, and your experience, from first glance through ownership, is nothing less than exceptional. Learn more at Genesis.com. When you're thinking about the narrative or the arc of the experience that you're designing, how visual is that process from the beginning? Is it more of a narrative? Is it immediately somewhat visual in your head? Like, how does it first, when it's first kind of coming to life, what does it look like?
Yeah, good question. I think it's visual. I think there are moments, there are scenes. What if we could create something that looked like this? And you get those milestones, and the task of the show is how you move between these extraordinary moments. And the degree to which it's narrative driven really is to do with the conversations with the performer. A performer can think in a very kind of linear narrative way, or it can be much more abstract. And so, so I respond to that. But no, it's pictures, really. Even at something as big as the Sphere, there were some touchstone moments that really seemed like, it seemed like a huge opportunity, or it'd be a shame not to do this thing. Now, they don't always survive. And of course, an early idea often suffers from coming along too early. And so even if it's a good idea, if it's just around for too long, sometimes it dies a death. But no, it's definitely pictures, I think, to begin with.
The other piece of that question, for me at least, is the technology, right? There is so much tech that goes into delivering the end experience, right? Whether it's video, whether it's rendering, whether it's real-time rendering, whether it's, CGI commissions, the way lighting is used, the way camera feeds are used, like all of that stuff. And then you also have the venue, and what is the venue capable of? And then now you have this venue like the Sphere, which is completely different from everything else. How much are you thinking about the tech in the creative process? Like, is it part of your palette, or is the experience as you're, again, in this early phase of coming up with something, are you imagining without the constraints of how you can build it? Or are you always aware of what parameters you need to operate within?
The answer's somewhere in between, because even though I say it's about pictures, I will often do a written sort of transcript of a show, not least because I can write in much more detail than I can draw. When you have a sense of, the beats of a show or where you're going, the next task obviously is how you create that. And I think you never start with the equipment. That's just completely the wrong way around. But at the same time, I think my instincts now, after so long, I think I instinctively know if something should be possible in a year's time or not. And so to say, we'll start the show and the performer arrives on stage, materializes like Star Trek. That's just never going to happen. So, but I think that's an instinctive thing rather than a checking out what technology is available. But no, that's, I think, is the process. The written, the script, if you like, can often describe images better than they can be drawn. And also what's nice about it is I've learned, certainly in working with a performer or a collaborator, the downside of CAD models and even VR and things like that is it's too precise. If you're showing an idea to somebody, to leave some room for interpretation is really helpful, because at that stage, you're never going to be able to render exactly what it is you want to do anyway. A great illustration of that was for U2's 2015 outing, which should have originally been their 2014 outing. Myself, Ez Devlin, and Rick Lipson designed a whole show, and it was very narrative driven through conversations with the band and their sort of extended group. And we always, when we start a project, we like to have a weekend where we can just get together, absolutely brainstorm. We probably haven't seen each other for a while.
Your team, not with the
with
customer
you two. No, with you two. So specifically with you two. Mm-hmm. We'll start with a weekend, and we'll all get together and really just brainstorm and blue sky it. And if there's new music, that's really helpful, and just find out what they're interested in now and what everybody else has been up to. And we get together and just put it out there. Probably have a very pleasant evening somewhere, and then wake up the following day and say, okay, what are we actually going to do? And this one tour, which became the Innocence and Experience tour, was really narrative driven. The album was about their growing up in Dublin, and it seemed like a really rare opportunity to do something that had a tangible kind of storyline to it. And we designed this whole show, and for various reasons, the tour was postponed for a year, during which time Rick and Ez and I kind of went off the idea a bit, and also you begin to see the flaws in it. And when we regrouped, we were going to present something new to the band. And the three of us, Rick and Ez and I, we were so sick of CAD drawings and models and all this stuff. We made a scrapbook. I mean, we actually made a scrapbook. The three of us sat there, got a walloping great A3, nice art book. You can cut things out of magazines and found things on the web and printed things. And it's actually in the Smithsonian now. It's in Ez Devlin's show in New York as kind of an artifact. And it was so successful because it allowed interpretation from the viewer. It was really getting the idea across rather than the physical parameters of how it would be done. And I really, really learned from that. And of course, there comes a point where you have to make the CAD model so it can be built. But some looseness in the presentations is really, really helpful. Helpful for me as much as it is for them, because you don't lock yourself into a particular thought or particular idea in a strictly tangible way.
Willie, you've been working with U2 for give or take some 40 years, 4 decades. It's a lot of time together, a lot of shows together. The band is, of course, known for their music, but also for their presentation, right? For their concerts for a long time. And not just this new wave of, oh, hey, to make money, we need to go on tour, but for decades and decades, wanting to go on tour, wanting to have these big and fairly elaborate presentations of their work was always a hallmark of that band. So for us, we think it's kind of fitting that U2 is the first resident into this brand new facility called the Sphere here in Las Vegas. And there's such a strong association between U2 and the Sphere. So we just want to be really clear to people who are listening, really what the difference is, right? The Sphere is simply a location. The Sphere is like a concert hall or an arena that happens to have some very specific built-in infrastructure that can be leveraged, both on the external skin, the part that's viewable from the outside, as well as on the inside of it. You're used to designing an experience, traveling with it, loading and unloading it and installing it, but really being kind of independent from this space. And here we are with the Sphere, which is really a very different and much more elaborate tool to use as part of that concert experience.
Yes, very much so. And initially I was really wary of that to begin with, because you're going into a space where the main feature of any show is a given. It's given to you by somebody else. And for me, what I've really done with one branch of my work is found a way of understanding how you can combine human being-sized people with big pictures. Make it how you can make a performance work with large pictures and actual size human beings. And even though many of the shows are very visual and have an enormous amount of film and video, the visual surface, if you like, always comes from the idea. And here we're walking into a space where the only given is this gigantic screen, which is clearly way out of proportion for any human being. And I was very wary of it because nothing about it seemed conducive to certainly my normal way of creating a show. And literally sometimes we'll go into a show not knowing whether there's going to be any video at all. I really like to be wide open when you go in and just see what the ideas are and see how that conversation develops. So this is the absolute opposite. But the real breakthrough came for me spending a bit of time there's a quarter scale model of the place in Burbank that you can run pictures in, which confusingly is called Big Dome, even though it's a small one. And we went there and they show you all the demo films and their nature films, and it's all very immersive and wonderful. Again, absolutely nothing to do with rock and roll and nature being pretty much incompatible. So, I really wasn't sure, but I wondered how would simple graphics work in a place like that, on that sort of surround screen? And so on a return visit, I'd made some very simple material. And when I saw that on the screen, particularly the shape-shifting capabilities of the space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's
because
special.
We as humans, we navigate space by corners. You know how big the room is that you're in because you can see the corners. And that space not only doesn't have any corners, but realizing that we could create our own corners, and the extent to which the brain just buys it is really astonishing. So at that point, I got quite excited, because also another thing about this show was we knew that they wanted to perform the whole of the Acting Baby album. And the great joy of having done that with Joshua Tree a few years ago was just seeing them look at this record. They looked at the Joshua Tree record. And of course, U2 don't listen to U2 albums. So their material is much more familiar to their audience than it is to them. And they looked at this thing and they presented that record, they presented the music with no hint of nostalgia at all. They just presented it like it was their new record. They kind of figured out how to play the songs that they hadn't played before. And there was a real joy in that, rather than, let's show movies of the guys back in the day and all the stuff you'd expect. So when we started off, I wasn't assuming that any of the Zoo TV style presentation would be relevant at all. Maybe it would be more about acting baby or whatever. But clearly, given the venue and given that it's made for giant pictures, it became apparent that Zoo TV style things would make an appearance, and boy, did they ever! And almost to the opposite extreme, I thought, well, if we're going to do it, let's do it, and let's open the show. And the first seven or eight songs, it's the same running order from the Zoo TV tour. And the first couple, it's a similar kind of visuals, but absolutely on steroids. And the degree to which your perception your brain just believes what it's saying. And the fact that we could change the shape of the room, we can make it infinitely tall, you can send a horizon line way off into the distance. And at that point, I got quite excited because the potential for just messing with people's minds was really too tempting.
Josh fell for it totally.
I was not falling for it. I mean, I knew what was going on, but I was just delighted by it. It was
but you're like, are we moving? Are we moving?
Was so impressive. No. It's like I knew we weren't moving.
but
still, it's like, wow, it really, at the end of the Brambilla thing, it feels like the stage is moving, but it is not. And the shape shifting. I mean, there's so many mind bending moments in that first, several presentations, the first several songs. It is nice that you then kind of get into a calmer moment, kind of let us recover from that mindfuck a little bit. Delightful mindfuck.
All the things like when you're sitting on a train and the train next to you moves and you think you're moving, that's what's happening, but just on this massive scale. And it was absolutely thrilling. I had a guest last night who actually had to go for a little lie down. Just from, not even from the seasickness, because it's not as physically disorientating as I'd feared it might be. Lateral movement is a bit tricky, but generally it's not too bad. But just the sensory overload, sometimes, people just...
But I think you manage that really well because you just kind of throw it out there. You're like, this is what this space can do and what we're doing in this space. And it's like, bam, bam, bam. It's like these huge moments. And then you pull it back.
Yeah.
And then you give people some time to digest it.
The equipment itself had been publicized so much, because a great joy, not just with you two, but a great joy for me is when you disguise the tech, and an audience coming into the space wouldn't necessarily know what this thing is going to do, whereas there everybody knew this was about gigantic pictures. So we figured, okay, let's just get that over with, and do it in a way that I think would surprise. That's the lovely thing. People have said to me that there are no spoilers for this show. You can watch it on YouTube, you can do all stuff, but nothing prepares you for actually being in that space.
Yeah, I think one of the exciting things for us was your friends that you bring into work. Sometimes really often, Brian Eno, John Gerard, Marco Brambilla as Devlin, Industrial Light and Magic. Favorites of ours as well that we've covered a lot over time in Cool Hunting. And it's so great to see their work be part of this experience. Again, separate from the sphere. It's in the sphere, but this is U2 content that's been created for this experience.
Yeah. And what a joy. And Marco Brambilla, I didn't know actually. I met him. I saw a piece of his work when we were... And it was just in time, because he normally likes a year or so to make a piece. And we're like, Marco, could you do all this in 6 months? Yeah. But absolute joy. And of course, when they come, they all came to Big Dome and to sort of get a handle on the parameters. And in seeing what it can be, it was really exciting just to see their enthusiasm. And Ez's piece, Come Home Again, which was in London, it was at Tate Modern in London, was a... space concave dome full of endangered species, and the thought of doing that on gigantic scale was irresistible. So no, it's really been wonderful. And similarly with Industrial Light and Magic, who the notion of the time scale and the budget that we had, we wondered if they would just snort politely and turn away, but they're so excited about being part of this. And I tell you what it is, what's fantastic for these visual artists, people who are immersed in the art world, etc., the thing that summed it up best for me was some years ago. It was for the Vertigo tour, 2006. I worked with Julian Opie, and we wanted one of his walking figures. There were going to be several, and again, we pared it down to just this one lonely walking figure. And I loved his response because he really understood that this was part of a greater whole, so there has to be some flexibility. But he wasn't afraid to say, we did take a couple of liberties with the work, and he wasn't afraid to say, tell us what he liked and what he didn't like, but he understood that we were all contributing to something that was bigger than all of us. But what was so great, and I thanked him for his generosity, because obviously a lot of fine artists, very rightly, are not born collaborators. And he just said, the thing is, he said, nobody applauds in an art gallery. And for people like that, who are even super high profile people who are used to having their work all over the world, to see that instant response, your work comes up at that scale and 10,000, 50,000 people all throw their arms in the air and cheer, it's pretty compelling. And it's thrilling for the collaborators on this show to see people. I mean, Mark had never seen 18,000 people losing their minds in his work. It's wonderful. It's really, really wonderful.
It really is.
Are there lessons learned from creating a production at the Sphere that are applicable to future work that might not be in an immersive environment like the Sphere? Like, I imagine that every project you do, there's new things that you're learning, that you're trying, that somehow might come into your palette. Are there things from this one that carry forward?
It's such a bespoke space. I mean, I've learned ever so many things about how to do a show in the Sphere. But whether they're transferable, I've no idea. It's hard to imagine they would be, because it's such a bespoke space. And the difference, I mean, I suppose the really interesting thing is comparing it to VR, because it is like VR without a headset on. And much of the work we did in VR, because I actually found VR to be a closer representation of the space than Big Dome. Because even though it's obviously in VR, the resolution's super, super low. Big Domes is misleading because you, the viewer, are 4 times the size you would be in the real space. And it just feels very different. Whereas in VR, at least you've got the actual space. You can move around without climbing the stairs, which is great. And just in terms of how big things needed to be, where to place them, I found that much more useful. And so in a funny way, I've learnt more about VR work than I ever thought I would in a lifetime. But I don't think it's transferable, because it's such a different experience when you've got the headset on and when you haven't. And to be in a space with thousands of people all hallucinating together, it's sort of the best of both worlds, actually. You get that magical freedom that you get with VR, but you also have the communal thing, because that's really what it's about. It's sharing this sense of wonder, being in this space and everybody seeing it together. And that's what makes it emotionally powerful, I think. So.
I love that comparison. And, of course, was also thinking similarly about, the analog between the Sphere and a virtual world that's rendered around you, and this, this kind of new era of spatial computing that we're just entering.
And also one other thing, because it's not like, Werner Wenger and those sort of visions of the future where we can all make up our own, even when we've done away with the headsets and, it's a chip, or we're just seeing it, or even if there's no gear and we're all physically together. It's a different thing when everyone's just making up their own world, because you're still, in a sense, the Sphere is kind of old-fashioned as an experience, because we're all there together experiencing the same thing. And that, I think, is a very different proposition to the other visions of the future where we can just, we can make up our own virtual worlds around us.
Speaking of being experts in the Sphere, and also, by the way, the only people who've really done something other than the content that the Sphere has created.
With the best show that's ever been in the Sphere.
It's been publicly announced that Dead & Co. is going to be there pretty soon, and that Treatment Studio is also going to be creating that experience.
Yes, that's where Sam goes to do his tour of duty, and I wish him all the best with that.
What advice are you going to give him? What lessons learned are you?
Bring your own tea. Yeah. Well, the thing is, Sam has obviously been part of the U2 Sphere journey, right. So he knows what to expect. The technical lessons, I think, absolutely will carry on into the future. And actually, to answer your previous question about what have we learned, certainly technically we've learned things that will accompany us into the future. Simple things, really dull things like designing visual sequences to minimize the render times. Because with files that big, I'm reliably informed by my producer that the YouTube content is 1.13 petabytes of data.
Yep.
And I believe that's 1 million gigabytes. But and so the render times was absurd. I mean, completely absurd. A minute of video was going to take 2 weeks to render. So that's obviously not going to happen. And so certainly the tech teams at Treatment managed to figure out how to reduce those times. So all of that stuff is super useful, and all of that will play into Dead & Co. But no, there's a lot to negotiate at the Sphere, not least that it's also a cinema.
Right.
And so it's the only residency where you have to load out after every show. So a lot of the design parameters are quite pragmatic, I think. But no, I will be, and of course Fish are in before the Dead & Co. So yeah, I'll be fascinated to see what anybody else does with it.
And Treatment is not doing Fish.
No, they're in next.
They're probably going to call you though. I have a feeling.
There have been conversations. Yeah, we've had conversations. Yeah. Actually, the only thing I have seen, and I haven't seen a proper showing of it, but I saw loads of the test showings, is the Darren Aronofsky movie, which is sort of the house attraction. And what I found really interesting about that was I could see in the work, obviously you can sort of read the mind of the creator, and I could see a director who was figuring out what might work in this building that doesn't exist yet. And of course that was exactly my frame of mind and my journey going into it. So I rather like that. Even though it's a completely different proposition, it was this leap into the unknown and second guessing how things might be. And that's quite exciting. So
there's one other component of the show that I think we have to talk about, which really doesn't have anything to do with the Sphere, its infrastructure. It's really Brian Eno and the stage that you created. Because there's no stage in the Sphere.
There's no stage in the Sphere.
You're walking into a movie cinema with a screen. Basically.
Yes, exactly. And there's no wing space. It's not a theatre. So, which actually is that's fairly comfortable territory for concert touring, because often you're working in sports facilities and et cetera, et cetera. So we were looking at the potential for staging ideas, and went through quite a few, and the feeling that maybe the stage should rise to be nearer the people at the top and all this kind of thing. But when you're actually in the space, because it's an amphitheatre, and amphitheatres are an ancient form of performance space, and the sightlines are really good. In terms of the focus, where your eye rests. And I realized quite quickly that whether you're down at the front or whether you're way, way up high, the kind of sweet spot for where your attention naturally rests is pretty consistent. And that's where the stage is, which is good. So it also made a bit of a nonsense of putting in the traditional, runways and B stages and that kind of thing, because there isn't really anywhere to go. And if you push forward into the house, it means people up top can't see you anymore. So the notion of a simple stage was appealing. And even though for a performer, it's like Mick Jagger always used to say, give me something to do. A performer likes to have places to go. But it's felt like this was appropriate. And also, having done Bono's one-man show, his solo show, on regular theatre stages, and really made that work. We made different places for him to perform and inhabit. The thought of a smaller space felt really appealing. But I think we all assumed that there would be some kind, it would be more than just a square, And I'm not quite sure how the conversation went, but Bono has one of Brian's turntables, and so we were kind of using it as an example.
And by turntables, you mean?
Yes. It's Brian Eno has made it's a record player turntable, but it's also one of his light sculptures. So it's a white perspex box that the round part, the turntable part, and the box itself light up in. They're two separate colors, and he designed an algorithm so the colors just run themselves randomly. And it sort of started off as a joke. Well, we could just make an exact replica of Brian's turntable, but huge, and then that's what we did. It was such a great idea. There's no arm, there's no record player arm, but the proportions and everything are exactly the same, but scaled up enormously. And I know him quite well, and so I went to chat to him about it. Saying, would this be okay, and also to ask if we could use the algorithm. And I said to him, what I'd like to ask is if we can just use the algorithm. It would be so thrilling for me to have a 20-minute portion of the show where the stage is just doing what it wants to do. The reason I wouldn't ask for exactly that is, what if the stage decides to sit on green for 20 minutes, which is, I speak from personal experience, not great as a lighting state for gentlemen of a certain age. So he said, funny you should mention that. His coder, Peter Chilvers, for some reason, they had a conversation after 20 years of making these sculptures where they wanted to be able to add a few more controls, because they write rules about what the colors are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. And so they wrote us an additional rule that the green wasn't allowed to go it alone. Basically, green could only go to a certain level by itself. So that all seemed fine. And then we were getting the show up and running. And rather remarkably and rather wonderfully, during that period, I now own one of Brian's original turntables, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And so over the Christmas break, I was home with this thing and watching it and just seeing the real turntable. The range of color and the subtlety and everything was way more than we're getting out of the stage. So I thought, okay. So I had a chat to him and to Peter Chilvers, and we thought, well, okay, let's just try it. So we basically unleashed the green, more or less. But what's rather wonderful now, I've been sending them pictures because the stage now is doing really, really beautiful things, but it's doing things that they don't think it should be able to do. Brian has a theory that the stage is evolving its own consciousness.
Yeah.
I have a theory that in its time off, the stage is looking at the internet and is worried that there aren't any more shows after March 3rd. And so perhaps Brian has a theory that the stage will go on tour by itself. But no, it's been wonderful. And the contrast of a show which parts of that show are so tightly controlled because everything is running in such sync, to have this time when the band also, they can play whatever they want and they're varying the set from night to night. And the stage, after 40 years of me designing shows and stressing over whether something should be red or blue, to just let Brian's algorithm take charge, it's really wonderful. It's very liberating.
Yeah. I also want to mention that in addition to the turntable doing that and having its own colorway, it also is a screen, right, or a display.
Yes,
so
yeah.
It does participate in the video content and the camera content that's happening that you're seeing on the screen of the Sphere as well.
And I'm very happy that it does, because one choice we nearly made, because I was being a bit of a purist, I was thinking we should only use it as Brian's turntable. We shouldn't use it as a video floor, because video floors have been seen. That's a known thing. But actually, it's been a great gift to be able to use it in different ways throughout the show. Not least because as a black object, there was a part of me that in an ideal world, the stage would have done nothing other than light up for the Brian Eno section. But actually, not only in Bono's words, not only did the stage in its because the stage is black when it's off, as opposed to Brian's turntable, which is white. And he said, not only does it have any energy, it is sucking energy out of the room. And it was a completely dead space. And so now, in very subtle ways and in less subtle ways, we now use it quite a lot more.
So I think we're going to throw to a break. And when we come back, dig into a little more of the future of live experience. Hey there, it's Josh from Cool Hunting's Design Tangents podcast, here to remind you that Master and Dynamic are the official headphone sponsor of the Surround Network. Whether it's over-the-ear wireless noise-canceling headphones or discreet yet powerful earphones, Master and Dynamic have a well-designed and incredible sounding option for you. These headphones happen to be Evan and my favorite brand. Learn more about their premium sound and meticulous craftsmanship at masterdynamic.com. Willie, you push the evolution of entertainment through storytelling at the crossroads of technology and live performance, and you've been doing it for a while. thinking back to one of the first, if not the first, multi-screen video live experience at a performance in 92, the first large-scale LED screen in 97, the first 360 degree viewable screen.
That also shapeshifted.
That also shapeshifted in 2009. Bringing augmented reality to live performance in 2020. Like they're all these firsts, and there are all of these uses of creativity and of technology and these advancements of innovation. You seem to always have this dance between spectacle and simplicity. And I'd love to just hear a little bit more about how you approach it and how that carries through into the future.
It's a good way of looking at it, because the question of, what does the future of entertainment look like? I mean, if anybody knew, then they'd be buying stock furiously. So you can only learn from the journey so far. And at the time, it wouldn't have been possible to tell what was really going to work and longer term or what wasn't. Some things, a good one is the AR experience that we did at the top of the U2 Experience an Innocent show. And I was very proud of that because, not least that we had an avatar singing in lip sync with a live vocal on people's own phones, but it was a sort of seamless way of bringing people from a pre-show experience into the show with no instructions. Because the last thing I was going to have was like on the screen, press the red button now. And the flow of that was really good. There was a whole pre-show experience on the phone where you looked at the arena through your own phone and it became something else entirely. And then that really taught the audience what to do. And it was lovely because you would see members of the audience, people that hadn't got the app, would be showing it to other people. And then people that did have it, they'd be showing them what to do. So it was self-educating. I was super, super proud of all of that. And then the show begins, and literally there is this avatar of Bono singing on your phone in lip sync to the live vocal, because it wasn't difficult enough as it was. But you know what? When we sat and really analysed that moment, it was a cerebral technical triumph that really didn't add any emotional connection to the show. And, that was hard to realize after the fact, because I really thought this had potential, a way of making even simple small shows. You could add this other dimension to it. And also, frankly, if people are going to be staring at their phones for the entire time, you might as well give them something that's integrated into the show to look at. But it just didn't. So those are the lessons that we learn going forward. And then other things. Literally when we did Zoo TV in 1992, it was such an outsider thing. The response was a little like to the Sphere. People were saying, I don't know what this is, but you have to go and see it. But for me, it wasn't at all. So I thought maybe we were done with video then. Maybe we wouldn't bother with another one until a few years later when, with the LED technology, myself and Mark Fisher developed this screen that could be the size of the end of a stadium, which no one had seen before. And then we were very interested in video again. So at the time, you don't really know what long-term contributions are being made. But always, it has to be in service of the emotional connection between the performer and the audience. Because if that doesn't work, then, like I say, it is just a sort of cerebral exercise. And my feeling is, look at what's happened post-pandemic when we all sat at home wondering. I really thought I really had to face the possibility that I was done, that my entire work situation may never come back again. And, made peace with that, and that was okay. And then now, you look at the number of tours. Arthur Fogel, who's the head of Live Nation Global Touring, he is amazed at...
He's a busy guy.
He's a busy guy. And the number of tickets that can be sold and what people will pay for them, there just doesn't seem to be a cap on it. His observation, which I think is also a big part of it, he said there's a whole new generation of concert goers now with the Harry Styles, Swiftie generation, before the older generation, before the Rolling Stones generation have died. So the demographic is wider now. But we've never seen this kind of thing, where you have 3 or 4 stadium tours out at the same time, each one of which is doing multiple nights in stadiums. I mean, that's absolutely never happened before. So that's for me as big a clue as the fact that the AR app was clever but emotionally dry as to where we're going. Now, what that looks like, I don't know. But I think it has to be this thing about actual community because it also, and I know it's tough here, but I know that politically U2's audience is really broad, but they're all there. And they're all having this shared experience. The entertainment of the future will need to serve that end, I think.
Bringing people together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have another future question, but before that, you were talking about the AR app and how it brought people together when one person was using it and someone wasn't, and they were looking at it through the same screen or helping each other figure out how to use it. Did you anticipate that? Or was that kind of a happy accident?
Not at all. No, not at all. I mean, I really thought that you'd have to read the instructions and then it would work on the night. And the take-up, again, we had no idea the level of take-up. And it was just enough. It was just satisfying enough to think it was worth doing. But actually, that is a good point because it did create social groups. There was another idea we had for a piece of tech that would make your phone ring. It would pick 2 phones in the room. It would make them both ring and then would connect them. So you'd find yourself speaking to a stranger and all you knew about this person was that they were at the same gig you were at. So it's sort of like the telephones at the Cotton Club, only more high tech. And that never came to pass. But, we had thoughts about how can you make the technology serve the audience interaction, basically, with each other rather than with the performer. And I think maybe the AR was successful in the audience interaction, but it certainly didn't help with the connection with the performance per se. So.
I love that you're working with the highest of high tech, right? Like the newest, latest, all these things. But it's not what drives you. You personally you are coming at this from a storytelling, really quite simply as a storytelling point of view, and as how do we deliver an experience that's engaging, that's fun for the band, right, for the performer, and engaging for the audience. And of course, the team needs to then deliver that in the best way possible. That's often leveraging state-of-the-art tech, but that's not where you start from.
Not at all. It's the two things of. I mean, I really do want to create something that people have never seen before and just creates a sense of wonder. But it's got to be fun. It's got to be fun. And a lot of the tech that we have is so dull. But there are things, I mean, you see it all the time with simple apps and things that go viral, things that are just fun. And to find a context within live entertainment for that kind of thing is incredibly compelling. And people love it, of course.
Is there fun in AI? What are your thoughts on how AI might come into this realm of live experience?
I mean, I'm with Nick Cave, really. And I'm sure in the world of things that really matter, the potential for how AI can speed the development of things that are useful to our species. I mean, I absolutely believe I'm not a Luddite in that way. But I think when it comes to, I don't think AI is very whimsical. Again, all I can do is quote Nick Cave, really, who his response to somebody sending him a chat GPT version of a song by Nick Cave was absolutely hilarious and well worth finding on the Red Hand files. But basically saying it's just a shallow parody of human emotion and spirituality. But we'll see. I mean, who knows? Who knows where this stuff is going? But I love the fact that in the YouTube Sphere show that Marco was there generating AI-generated Elvises. I mean, that just tickled me deeply. But that wasn't the point of that piece. The point of that piece is just this absurdly overwhelming mass of stuff in the way that he does. Whereas I think if we'd said, we've got an AI-generated Elvis, I think that would have been far less interesting in the same way that the, quote, holograms of, Michael Jackson, whoever, they're fine, but there's not much to it, So I think, and there are a couple of other AI things in the show, and to an extent, Brian's turntable algorithm, that's doing its own thing.
Especially as it wakes up and realizes it needs to find a new venue.
It will
soon,
kill us all.
die.
Yes. So as I say, I think it'll be for us to watch what develops. But obviously, my role is very responsive. Often, it's a very reactive position, particularly when working with a performer. And at those moments, sometimes the dots join, and you think, "Oh, yes, this would be the very thing," or we could do this. It's quite spontaneous. The process is quite spontaneous, even though the application has to be obviously very measured and with ever so much preparation.
We had the opportunity to see the U2 show at the Sphere.
From multiple vantage points too.
From multiple vantage points,
right.
Yes. We were zipping around between the floor and other spots within the space to
the
see,
control booth.
Yes,
that was pretty epic.
Yes, to see kind of the best vantage points for the best moments, and that was absolutely incredible. And that was the night when consumers who bought the Apple Vision Pro received their devices. So it was launch day of Apple Vision Pro. And that was also very much on our minds when we were, on our way from New York to Vegas to come see you and to come see the show. This was touched on earlier in our conversation, this idea of virtual reality or spatial computing or immersive experience. And it was very clear and a little bit profound in the moment of seeing the show that it wasn't that different from putting on the headset. Obviously, there's no community, there's no audience. There's the luxury of being in a large space and being able to run around to different vantage points. And yes, in that it was very, very different. And at the same time, it felt like we were seeing the spectrum of what an immersive experience could be today. I could also really imagine watching the show in a headset. Do you think that there is a place for creating a concert-like experience that's dedicated to what someone would watch in a headset? Or do we want to keep them live experiences that then are recorded in spatial video to be able to play back in something like Apple Vision Pro?
I think as long as you don't mistake it for a substitute for the actual experience, I think it's fine. It's really interesting how, despite concert touring being such a huge business for so many years, live concerts on television have never really worked. There was a brief moment, again, in the 18th century, whenever it was, when they were doing the pay-per-view. I remember Zoo TV actually was a pay-per-view. So that would time it. And around that time, sort of late 80s, early 90s, there'd be these pay-per-view on HBO where you could watch the concert. And I guess there was a novelty to that worked to a certain extent. And then it became home video and DVDs, and they would just never sell very well. And now you absolutely can't get arrested. I mean, most shows aren't released because they're so expensive to record. And it's just not a way that it works. Now, obviously, a headset or some kind of spatial recording would work much better. But you'd have to see it as exactly that. It's a recording of the event rather than replicating the experience of being there. U2 made a 3D concert movie many moons ago. And I remember going to see that. In fact, we took the studio to see it at the IMAX in Waterloo in London. And we're all sitting there with the glasses on and this, that, and the other. And the technology really works. And I was laughing because there was a moment with a camera on the edge of the stage. So it was like you were standing on the edge of the stage watching U2 perform, which I've done many times at sound checks. And Bono turned around and looked at the camera, and I felt like I needed to look busy. So the technology really worked. But nobody, people don't applaud or engage the same way. I mean, I suppose one exception is ABBA, which is a triumph for the ABBA Voyage show in London, the virtual show, is a triumph. And I love watching the audience there because some people are at a party, they're coming to a gig. Other people are definitely at a movie. And so somewhere in between those two extremes, everybody finds their response. But it's such a different response. But look, as a record of a show, it could really work. I think the notion that they can be interactive, I think, is probably not going anywhere. And with some of the early experiments we've seen over the past decade, where there are cameras you can move and you can change your perspective. It just never seems to work in a way, because that's not how we look at things. That's not how we absorb any kind of live concert. But look, who knows? We'll see if the technology works well enough. It'll be wonderful to at least be able to record these things, because of course I work in a medium that's impossible to record.
Right.
But that's just the way it is. It doesn't.
It's something we've been talking a lot about this weekend, Josh. Is imagine a space where, yes, you can have this great experience in real life if you're physically able to be there and be present for it, but also to be able to access it in a different but similar version where it's maybe live coming in through your headset, and you're able to be there remotely and maybe have many more people, because you can't.
Yeah.
Not everyone can physically be in that space. It's interesting to think about.
I like many people, I was involved in during the pandemic of developing a virtual audience technology, and it went very well. Lots of interest from lots of companies, etc. And cracking the audio was the key thing. And we built and trialed this way where a performer could see a whole sea of people and they could see him and interact and all that kind of thing that was going on. And it was quite exciting. And as I say, we had interest and companies sniffing around and talk of money and this, that, and the other. And the minute the pandemic ended, nobody ever mentioned it again.
Because people just want to get back to the auditorium.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that could be a bit of an Achilles heel. Because you don't go, imagine going to a concert alone.
It's like the silent disco.
Yeah,
So
you
it's
go
just like,
by yourself
bopping around.
with no one you know, and you watch it. It's just not the way we do this. For some reason, you need sort of affirmation or acknowledgement that you're there. And I think one of the things I learned about turning on the house lights is you have this moment where you see the performers, but you can also see yourself. You see yourself in the same airspace as these people who can do something you can't do. And if they're very recognizable, that's also part of it. And it's not the same experience when it's virtual, when it's at a remove, which is not to say that there isn't an application, but I just don't think that's it. So
there were two really nice moments in the Adele show.
I was just going to go there.
Right, where the lights come on, and so she's able to engage and see the audience. But then there's also the moment when that happens in the end, and the cameras are turned towards the audience. And so you have the entire audience that everybody can see. Just like you see on a stadium
on the screens of the stage, and shown in a way that feels like a continuation of the seating. So all of a sudden,
it's like looking across the stadium.
Yeah, exactly, like looking across the stadium.
Yeah, that was a really great moment.
Yeah. And that's what we need from those live music moments. It is a communal thing. Yeah, well, look, if the technology can work that out somehow, we'll be fine, but we'll see.
Willie, you've been really generous with your time, and we've had a lot of fun here today. I'm super grateful for the experiences you've created and that we've been able to experience, and for this very private and intimate one that we can now share.
Yeah, grateful and inspired. Thank you.
Thank you. I love you so much. Thank you very much indeed.
If you're new to Cool Hunting, we've been reporting on creativity and innovation since 2003. Visit coolhunting.com or Cool Hunting on social media channels to see what we think's worth sharing. And consider sending it to your friends in text, Slack, email, or social groups.
If you enjoy Design Tangents, please follow our pod wherever you listen. And every positive review you leave is very much appreciated.
Thank you to Master and Dynamic, the official headphones of the Surround Network. And thank you to Matthew Deere, who created our original music.
Design Tangents is produced by Surround, part of the Sandow Design Group. Discover more shows from Surround at surroundpodcasts.com. We're in great company there. This episode was produced and edited by Rob Schulte.
At surroundpodcasts.com, you will also find transcripts, show notes, and links for each episode of Design Tangents. Those are also available on coolhunting.com, of course.
Thanks for listening. We'd like to thank Genesis for their ongoing support in presenting Design Tangents.
Discover more about Genesis at genesis.com.